nanohub.org.
Online simulation and more for nanotechnology.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Friday evening. And we assume you have a strong interest in graduate school. And we have built, I think, an interesting program here. We are going to hear from two of our distinguished colleagues from Michigan State University and the University of Michigan. I'll let them introduce themselves in just a few minutes. But the way we're going to do that is that first we're planning on giving you an overview of the graduate school, pros and cons of different practices, advantages and drawbacks of different options you might be exploring, different ways to go about what you want to do. We think this might take us about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, something like this. Then we're going to have a short break. There's going to be some refreshments and food. And as we do that, we will assemble ourselves into a panel session, and you can ask us questions for the remainder of the evening or night or until tomorrow morning. We are here for you. All right, so let's have our distinguished colleagues introduce themselves. So we have Professor Mike Flynn.
Hi there, I'm Mike Flynn. I'm the Associate Chair for Graduate Affairs at the University of Michigan. And I started talking with Tim and Dimitri about this about last month. What we're seeing is that we get awesome applicants to our graduate school, but I think a lot of our students in the Midwest are actually missing out on the great opportunities that you can get out of grad school. So we got together to put this series together, and we're actually going to be doing it in the 3 universities. So in a couple of weeks, Dimitri's going to be driving all the way up to Ann Arbor, and then we're going to go to Michigan State as well. So.
Hello, it's an honor to be here. I'm Tim Hogan over at Michigan State University. Been there for about 19 years now, and now I'm associate chair for graduate studies, similar to Mike. So, been working in an area of thermal electrics over the years, and most recently we make diamond. So we fabricate it, and I'm part of that group right now. So. Looking forward to talking with you more.
Did you bring some diamonds?
Yeah, I should have.
Yeah, you got my questions. Great. And for those of you who haven't seen me yet, I'm Dimitrios Peroulis, also here, the Director of Graduate Admissions in Electrical and Computer Engineering. So we're going to go ahead and give you our, how can I say, collective words of wisdom. And then, as I said, we're going to go into a panel with questions. So the title of the talk is going to be Why Go to Grad School and How to Apply. And the why and the how really are the focus of this discussion. So the first thing I'd like to say is that, as you probably heard our introductions, we're all coming from academia, at least in the current state of our careers. So as I'm talking, to different people from grad school, I often hear comments such as, what you're saying is great about going to grad school or PhD, but all of you guys already have PhDs. So, also all of you are in academia, right? And I'm not necessarily thinking of going to academia. So should I take that into account while I'm making my decision? Some people will even go as far as saying, you guys don't really live in the real world. You live in this academic environment, and therefore the way you're thinking about grad school and PhD may not necessarily be the way that other people are thinking. And, all of these facts are true, but I think the other side of the picture is even stronger in the sense that one of the strengths we have by being in academia is that we constantly observe hundreds or if not thousands of life stories. So we have our students who, some of them go to grad school, some of them don't go to grad school, some of them become professors, some of them don't, and we get to see them over long periods of time. So we get a lot of feedback from people who are now in your shoes, but also from people who used to be in your shoes and they're looking at their lives 20 years later. And so we get to see part of, a life story that you haven't experienced yet. So I think this gives us quite a bit of wisdom and quite a bit of insight into that. The other part is that even though we're now in academia, Many of us have worked in industry before. Professor Michael Flynn, for example, has held various positions in industry, both in the United States as well as abroad, before becoming a professor in a university. But in addition to that, even though we are in academia right now, I think we're really well grounded to the real world, in the sense that many of our projects are actually funded by companies or government. Many of our students are actually going and graduating and interacting directly with people from companies while they're still in grad school. So I think we understand the problems quite well. The last thing I'd like to say is that we really have an opportunity to see what's coming in a way that many might not. And so we feel pretty confident that the advice we plan to give you today is quite sound. So, you can pick a lot of different reasons of why should you be thinking about graduate school. And it's honestly hard to pick one versus another, because different people have different priorities and different people have different life stories. But we think that the number one reason that you probably will be thinking about going to grad school has to do with your career afterwards. And honestly, it's quite amazing to have a job that actually brings all of these benefits to you. Going every morning to a job that you truly, truly enjoy is a privilege. And I would say the majority of the people who basically graduate, they don't get that. The great thing about going to grad school is that your chances of getting a job that you truly enjoy doing increase exponentially. Also, the freedom to create the future is something that you don't get easily. It's interesting, but you can go to a job that you might enjoy for the first year or two, and then suddenly you realize that, that's it. There's nothing else. Well, jobs that you tend to get after graduate school education, they get to be at the forefront of what you're doing pretty much for your entire career. You get to create the future for the next 30 to 40 years that you might be working in there. The growth potential is huge as a result. You don't get to stop your growth as a graduate student. In fact, this is only the beginning. You get to see essentially what's coming, and you get to keep growing and learning. The other part is that mistakes are allowed, in the sense that if you think that you should be going to industry and then you decide, I think I should enjoy more a research lab or in academia, or vice versa, you become a professor and suddenly you see, well, this is not for me. Career choices are open, and having a PhD degree, for example, gives you by far the most flexibility out there. Finally, we should not underestimate the financial freedom these jobs come with. In this day and age, it's not easy to get a job that pays well, and you enjoy doing and all of the other things. And as you will see in a minute, jobs that come after grad school pay really well. Now, you might say, okay, this all sounds quite wonderful, but can you tell me exactly why this will happen? Is this just an advertisement, or can you explain why? Well, here's why. Just in a few words. The first thing is that after grad school, you really are the expert. You might be thinking that, oh boy, this sounds a little bit scary. And in some ways it is, but you really are the expert. People are paying attention to what you're saying, perhaps more than you're paying attention to what you're saying yourself. Also, you learn to truly see the future. Sometimes you see the future simply by observing what's happening around you and understanding what's happening around you and projecting ahead of you, sometimes by simply creating the future. You also learn to become a lifelong learner. That's an extremely important skill, particularly in the world we live in. Being a lifelong learner means that you can become very adaptive. You learn how to basically change careers, and if it turns out that you need a change of career or you need to retool your skills, you can basically do that. The other part that a lot of people underestimate is that confidence is huge. Confidence is something that you truly get by doing hard stuff, and grad school is a great way to do that because it's a very safe environment. Grad school allows you to fail. Grad school allows you to fail without losing your job. Grad school allows you to explore things in a way that no one else will ever allow you to do that. So building up this confidence and becoming fearless and going from this attitude, well, I'm not sure, to, yes, I can do this tomorrow, is something that a lot of people are lacking, but you can get that by going to grad school. And finally, all of these things make you a leader. And it's leaders that are basically appreciated both in industry as well as in academia, as well as in government. And it's leaders that basically get to enjoy the benefits I mentioned before. Now you might say, great, but what about salaries? Get to the money. Particularly, there is a rumor out there that if you go to grad school, you might enjoy all of these things, but you're going to make less money in your life. And I want to basically say that this is definitely not correct. There is hard data. Some hard data are presented here. This is coming directly from the US Census. That is basically giving you average earnings of people who went and got a bachelor's degree. So this is the earnings that you will get from people who got a bachelor's degree in engineering on average. This is what you get if you get a master's degree, and this is lifelong earnings. So essentially, you're jumping by about $600,000 here. This is what happens if you get a professional degree, and this is what happens if you get a doctorate degree. I'm not showing you these numbers to convince you that going to grad school is the way to become rich. It's not. But I'm showing you these numbers to convince you that you're not losing money opportunities if you actually go to grad school. The opposite is true. So that should not be an inhibitor, essentially, of going to grad school. Another way to see exactly the same thing is by actually asking yourself, how many people am I competing with? So this is a graph that shows you what happens in the United States. This is taking data from 2011 in terms of educational attainment. So you can see, for example, that about 12% of the population has less than a high school degree education. About 31% has completed high school. Look at how many have completed doctorate degrees, about 2%. And about 8% have completed basically master's degrees. So you're at the elite of the elite in the sense that nobody can get a higher degree than what you have. That's, in my mind, not just satisfaction, but job security as well. So the next part is going to talk about master's or PhD. Professor Tim Hogan is going to lead us into this.
Thank you, Dimitri. So you might be asking yourself, should I go for a master's? Should I go for a PhD? Which one is the better one to go for? Well, if you're thinking about a master's, that's going to take you a chance to dive in a little bit deeper, to take where you've built your foundation in an undergraduate. There's a particular area that I might be interested in. Maybe you've already started to focus a bit in your undergraduate degree, but you say, no, I'm not quite as interested in that. Maybe I want to do a little retooling of what I'm going to study. There's a good opportunity for you to do that within the master's program. So you can take a deep dive into the field. You can retool. It also offers some advantages that Dimitri talked about a moment ago on what's available to you out there in the workforce. So the entry-level positions. You may find that I like this. I enjoy if you're doing a research option for the master's, and there's a couple of ways of doing it. If you're doing the research, I really enjoy this. I want to continue on. I want to go on. If you have that inclination, I would encourage you, as you prepare your master's program, you think that ahead so that what you take there also counts towards the PhD. Because sometimes there are options that will count only for the master's, but not for the PhD. But if I'd chosen a higher level class, then it'll count for both. I don't have to go through and retake them. At the PhD, now you're really, as was stated earlier, you're really becoming the expert in the field. At some point, you're going to know more than your advisor. Okay? A clear sign that you're ready or very close to ready to finish up. Okay? So you become the expert. People are calling you for answers on this. You learn how to do the research. There's a scientific process, but there's a lot of aspects to that you have to go through and learn. How are we going to progress through this research project? How do we come up with the next hypothesis and test that? Feynman said, research has to be kind of like a bending over backward. You not only tell what you found out, what was really interesting, but you have to also stand up there and say, this is why everything I said might be wrong. Here's some possibilities that this could be not accurate. I've seen that actually at some conferences too. So now you get this serious depth, but in my field, I was doing thermoelectrics. It's a very multidisciplinary. We were working with physicists, mechanical engineers, material scientists, chemists. It's very multidisciplinary. We were just talking about how these meld so much overlap. The simulations that you're doing for circuits can be applied to thermal circuits as well. We did that quite a bit with the thermoelectrics. So you start to see this overlap, and you hear them talk about things, you say, wow, that sounds a lot like what I'm doing in some of my work. So there is depth, but there's also this breadth. There's this overlap. And also, if you're looking towards positions, it opens up industry, academia, government labs, start your own business, a lot of possibilities. So, who pays for this? Did I skip? I went one. I skipped one. What does it take? I don't want to skip that. All right, what does it take? So, master's is going to be about 1 to 2 years. Okay? And you have a couple of options here if you're going to focus on just coursework. I'll get the coursework done. Or I want to do this with a thesis. I want to get into the research lab, not just in the classes. Okay, so the thesis option, this may have the research component. This is going to require some write-up. You'll get up in front of a committee and give a defense at some point of the thesis. You'll turn that in as part of it. Or you might go coursework, which is purely course option. If you're going for PhD, then it's about 5 years beyond your bachelor's. 2 to 2.5 of this is going to be at the courses, and the remainder of research. So there's a very significant portion of this that is your research. Okay? Learning what others have done, talking with them, contact those experts out there that have done something on a particular paper that you're modeling for your work. Let them know what you're doing. Get to the conferences, speak with them there, start that network. Very important. Really, if you put this into as concisely as you could, what do you have to do? You have a qualifying exam. You have a proposal, or sometimes we call it a comprehensive. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I propose. A time to say, here's what's unique about it. Because you need that unique aspect for the PhD. Okay, so this is your proposal. It's usually after you've built up some evidence. You've gotten your coursework largely done. You built up some evidence that you're going to be unique and it will be successful, but enough time that if there's some changes from the committee, you can make those changes. Okay, you can dig in a little bit deeper or do some other things, and then finally you get up and give your defense. That's an open. Anybody can attend that. That needs to be open. But of course, your committee is there to ask some additional questions beyond that. But it's just a presentation to give. Now, who pays? Okay. This is one of the presentations we wanted in order to dispel some of the misconceptions that exist out there. If you look at a master's level, you might be doing research or you might be doing teaching assistantship. These are a couple of possibilities for funding, depending on the nature of the research, whether that's assistantship as a quarter-time or a half-time assistantship, or in some cases might be an hourly position. You might be working with industry, get some industry support. Also, there are students that will be self-supported, or they may bring in funding sources externally to support them, sometimes from governments. At the PhD, typically we have 100% of our PhDs funded in their first years. Now that can change later on because the funding source might go away. The research from National Science Foundation or Department of Energy might finish up, and there may be some interruption to that. Progress might not be as well as is expected. That can happen. But the misnomer that you have to pay for that in engineering, just do a good job. There are a lot of positions out there, a lot of funding sources out there. Government, industry support, again, for the doctoral level, endowments that can come in as well. And then very few, if any, are self-supported at the PhD level. So what does that mean? That means you take home a stipend, a paycheck. It means that it covers your tuition for a certain number of credits that you can take. And it means that it covers your health. So your benefits are also covered. Okay? So that's... All right. What matters? So I'm ready. I'm going to put in my application. What do I have to do on that application? What do I have to put in there? Well, what's important on that? As you're applying, where did you get your undergraduate? What was the reputation of the university that you have for your program? What kind of GPA did you get? Often there's a threshold that is looked at. Letters of recommendation. Interact with the faculty that you're working with now. You'll be asking them for letters of recommendation often. You'll be asking several of them for a letter of recommendation. So make sure that they understand who you are. Try to work with you so that they can add a little bit more than they were in my class. Okay. Research or personal statements, you need to come up with these on the application. You'll have to take a GRE and a TOEFL typically. You might have an undergraduate research experience that make up for, I didn't have the best GPA, but I got involved and I had some research experience. If you have contacts with some of the faculty you might want to work with, that's always helpful. Applications are reviewed by very busy people. We have over 1,000 applications that come in. And we have a committee that looks through those. Okay? So that's a lot of paperwork to get through. Right? Make yours stand out. That's important. Be honest on it. Be polite, but be aggressive. We're all very busy. Okay? I very much like getting contacted, but I don't always respond right away. Okay? Because it's busy. Keep trying. Can I come and knock on your office? Can we Skype? Whatever it takes. Get some FaceTime. It's really good. Should I, like we were just saying, contact them? Should I contact the faculty? Yes. I would say yes, yes, yes. Contact them. Be persistent, but be polite. Don't get discouraged if you don't get a response. They're just busy. They've got a lot of people contacting them and a lot of fires to be put out, quite honestly, in the job. So, maximize your chances by contacting several faculty. Why do we say that? Well, maybe we're working together on some proposals. And I've already hired all that I can hire onto my proposal. I'm done. But Mike has several proposals. He just got one in, and so he's looking for somebody, right? By contacting multiple faculty, often you're going to wind up working with many of the faculty on your committee anyways, and the topics, like we say, are often multidisciplinary, so you're often on bigger teams. What are some of the common mistakes that you might want to avoid? A 12-page long email. I do see it sometimes, very long emails going in depth about ever since I was born, I wanted to join your group and things like that. Avoid that. You can get to the point and show your interest. I had a program manager that was very demanding once, and her comment was, complete but concise. Complete but concise. She really drilled it into us. And it was good advice. Avoid things like "you're my last hope." That doesn't sound so good from a faculty perspective. Why would I be your last hope? How did it get to that? That's maybe a little concern from a faculty's perspective as well. Sometimes I get emails that say, "Dear Professor Sepulveda." No, that's not me. that's a colleague of mine. Or a blanket email that is CC'd to everyone in the department. Also, I would avoid that. Best thing, similar with a company, you can think of these faculty as mini companies, right? They have to manage it as a company. You wouldn't want to contact a company before you'd done a little bit of homework about them. So you can speak about some of the things that they're doing. Do a little bit of homework, look at their web pages, see what they're interested in, see what they're working on. I think that's a great idea. So I think that finishes up. I'll turn it over for Mike.
Thanks, Tim. So just a couple of slides left, in fact, and more about funding, it happens. So basically, when you're going to grad school, you have a lot of things to worry about, and paying for your education and paying for your expenses is a huge worry. Right now, as undergrads here, your families or you have paid a huge amount of money. I know about this because my eldest son is a senior and he's applying, and we're really scared as a family about the numbers we're seeing, like, $70K per year or whatever. So, but anyway, we're going to have to get through that. So, don't let the expense of the idea of the expense of grad school put you off going to grad school, because especially if you're doing a PhD, you shouldn't have to pay anything. Now, the sort of things that we need to think about are the tuition, right? And just like for undergrads, there is tuition there, but you're not going to be paying it. The cost of your living, that's going to be covered by a stipend, right? And finally, then there's healthcare. You guys are all young and healthy, but sometimes things go wrong, or you might get the flu or something. So you need to get healthcare. Luckily, most universities have very good healthcare on campus. A lot of them are associated with hospitals, in fact. But healthcare costs money, right? So typically for Michigan students, right, if they had to pay their full tuition, it would be something like, 30-something K per year. But we cover that, right? And the cost of living, generally most universities will give about 30K per year as a stipend, right? And then the healthcare, it's worth about 4 or 5K per year. So all of this adds up. Now, if you're doing a PhD, all of those things should be covered, right? And as Tim was saying, for a master's, to a lesser extent, they'll be covered, right? Now, how are those things covered? Well, just as for undergrads, you can get fellowships, right? Some of these are cover a lot, and some of them cover less, right? I'll show you in a minute some examples of some fellowships that you can get from, for example, the National Science Foundation, right? And those are very prestigious. And I'll just remember to apply for those if you're going to grad school. It's very helpful. A lot of universities will offer fellowships to grad students for, say, their first year or for their first semester, right? Now, the thing about fellowships is that, well, it looks nice on your resume later to say you got a fellowship, but a fellowship should give you some flexibility about the research that you do, right? There's another type of funding called a research assistantship, right? And in the research assistantship, you're going to be working for a professor in a lab doing research related to what that group does, right? So you might be working with Dimitri on, some sort of RF filters and MEMS, or working with Tim on or thermoelectrics, or maybe, doing stuff with me on analog circuits, right? Now you'll be doing your own research in that group, but you'll be contributing to some sort of bigger research theme that's funded by, some money from DARPA or whatever, right? And then the last category then is a teaching assistantship. So in a teaching assistantship, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be helping teach a class, right? Now, you guys have taken classes here as undergrads where there's the professor and there's the TA, right? And the TA is earning his or her money by helping out with teaching, right? Now, when you look at these three categories, which do you guys think is the best, right? Yeah. TA, you think TA is the best, right? Why do you think TA is the best?
Well, I'm currently a TA and I know a lot of TAs, so and it's also teaching material that you've already covered.
Right.
So it lets you not only revise material that you've covered in previous years,
right,
but it lets you master it to a further degree because you're answering everybody's questions.
That's a very good perspective to have on a TA, right? So you do get to learn a lot. If you want to be a professor, it's important that you have TA'd at some stage because your job is going to be, a large part of your job is going to be to teach, right? So being a TA for some bit of time is a good idea. The thing is, though, you don't want to be a TA for all of your time because I know you probably would agree that you spend a huge amount of effort as a TA preparing, meeting students, answering emails. If you want to do a PhD and TA at the same time, it's really tough. So that's why you hear of students in, say, doing, English or German or something, and they're spending like 8 or 9 years doing PhD. That's because they're TAing as well at the same time, right? So then how about the other two, like fellowship or research assistantship? Which of those is better? Yeah.
I'd say research assistantship. Because,
right.
You actually get to probably publish something.
Right. So, yeah, exactly.
Exposure into the scientific method.
Yeah.
While you're getting paid for it. So.
Right. Yeah. So you do need to be doing research. You do need to be tied in, in a research group and working with a faculty mentor to do your research. So a fellowship is a good way to get in and give you some flexibility, but you really, for the most of you, will need to have some sort of research assistantship eventually as the sustainable path towards getting your PhD. Now, there's a few other sources of funding out there. Like the next few slides have got to do with fellowships, and then I'm pretty much done. So you're going to be applying for a PhD or master's. Generally, the applications go in, and December 15th thereabouts for PhD. If you're applying for a master's at Michigan, it's January 15th. And then you'll send off lots of applications. Maybe, I don't know, how many would you suggest, right? Maybe apply to it's kind of like applying for undergrad, but it's probably not as stressful, right? Maybe send out 8 to 10 applications. And you do the same kind of strategy as you did for undergrad. You have the places that you really like to go to, your stretch goals, and then some places that are kind of backup that are still very good, right? So do some kind of strategy like that. So anyway, you apply, and then, around February or so, you'll start hearing from universities, right? And they'll say, hey, you're awesome. Please come to our school. And this is the offer package we're going to give you, right? And they're going to spell it out. Like the Michigan one has 2 pages, and it kind of looks like a contract. Looks kind of scary. And it says, well, we're guaranteeing your funding for 5 years. And then, the first year will be fellowship, and the other years will be research assistantship. Similar kind of story for you guys, right? So then you'll get to see what's there. But, just read that carefully, because you don't want to be in the case where you get admitted to your favorite school, but there's no money in there, right? Because you might say, well, I'll go there and money will arrive, but it mightn't, right? Or you might not want to go to a place and just be teaching for 5 years, because that might not be the experience you want. Now, there are other fellowships that you can target as well. The National Science Foundation has some. There's the National Defense, Science and Engineering Graduate Fellowship. That's another one, right? Those are ones that you apply to completely separately, right? The applications for the National Science Foundation Fellowship are due in a couple weeks, right? So you can still scramble for those. For those, you write a page or two about some research idea you might have, right? And so, for example, if you're doing research as an undergrad, you might be doing something, say, in brain prosthesis or something like that, right? And then you might know something about it. So then you could write how you'd like to research that in grad school and why it's important to you. And you send off the application, and there's some letters that you put in as well, a recommendation. And then the National Science Foundation might later on tell you have a fellowship. Now, those fellowships are great because they cover 5 years, and they pay about 2/3 of the funding that you need for your PhD. And the nice thing about those is You can then go to a professor who you really like, but maybe she doesn't have a lot of money for students, and you can say, hey, it doesn't matter. I've got this NSF fellowship, or I have an NDSEG fellowship, right? So those can be, they're well worth applying to. If you're applying for grad school, you're going to have letters anyway. You're already talking to faculty. You might as well apply for those as well, I think, right? A lot of students don't, but I think they're missing out. There's some fellowships for master's students. They're much fewer to, and harder to find, right? And as Tim mentioned, a lot of master's students end up paying a good chunk of the master's tuition themselves. In some cases, master's students can get some teaching assistantship or get to work in a lab as well, right? So that can help out. So I think this is pretty much the last slide, and this is something that Dimitri found from, there's a web page called PhD Comics. Have you guys seen this one before? It's Jorge Cham does it. And these comics are great, right? There's a lot of insight about professors that are, it's scarily true, right? He started this when he was a grad student at Stanford. He's a chemical engineer, I think. And now he's a professor at NC State or something, and he's still doing these. So if you want to learn more about grad school, it's actually a fairly decent resource to look at as well. So that's it for me. I think now we're going to open it up for questions after.
Yeah, so right now, again, it's really hard to cover everything in 30 minutes. So that our point was not to do that. Our point was to put some reasons to start thinking about those things. We're going to assemble ourselves as a panel here. And we did invite you to ask us anything you like. Now, you see there is something called food. We know that if food is zero, the seminar appeal is zero. So there is food coming, but we will delay it for a few more minutes until you guys start asking us questions so you can earn your food. All right? So.
I had a question about the letters of recommendation. I'm a quad student, which means I spend half my time in school actually at work. So most of if I go to grad school, my letters of recommendation would come from my coworkers. Is that valid? Are those kinds of recommendations looked down upon as professors are better?
Who is this question for, specific or all of us?
I'd say they're valid letters to have written. You might want to not have them all from one group or the other, but a little bit of a mix. But
yeah, well, one thing to watch out for is that it takes a lot of work to write letters, and as academics, we have a lot of practice, so that helps. People in industry, they can be very factual about the letters. I actually before I studied in Ireland and did my master's and then worked and then did a PhD in the US. And I got my boss, who was actually a friend of mine, to write a letter. And somehow, back then, the letters were they were stuck in envelopes and stuff. And, then you put them in with your package, and now it's a lot easier. But he was very proud of the letter, and he said, you should read the letter I sent. And I opened the letter later on, and it was very factual. It was like, he was a good employee. He was good at CAD. It's kind of like, so basically, and then when I went to Carnegie Mellon, my advisor, I met him on the first day. He said, well, one of your letters was a bit off, but, the rest of them were okay. And he meant well, he thought he was writing a great letter. So for that reason, you have to watch out, right? And you actually might want to even say, hey, this is a letter for applying to grad school, and those letters have to be super strong, right? So you can tell them that. Yeah.
I don't have much to add, just one quick comment. Even though you are in a co-program, you still can get letters from academics because you're still taking courses, right? And so I would say the best thing is to have a balance of the people who can provide very strong letters. Ideally, you don't want all industry letters. You want a mixture of things. But the strength of the letter is very critical.
Get someone who has a PhD. If there's someone who has a doctorate there, they will understand more about the, what's required, right? So they'll be better keyed into.
They may ask for a CV or some summary of your interactions.
You know, like for my senior high school son, you know, at his high school, they asked for a brag sheet, right? So you might want to just prime your letter writers with a brag sheet, you know. It just helps people to write, you know, so.
I actually have a couple of questions. My first is about, not really the funding part, but like RAs and TAs. So what if I wanted to do a little bit of both during my time as a student? Is that common / possible, or?
Yeah. Yeah, a number of students come in and say, they talk with their advisor and say, I'm interested in the teaching aspect of things. I'd like to work that into the program along the way. And then often it's kind of scheduled with how the funding is going with the research and timing throughout your program, what makes the most sense for that. But yeah, I did 3 years of TAing in my doctorate, so yeah.
Yeah. So again, like, I think teaching for a little while is great, but just that caveat that if you're teaching a lot, it's going to be really hard to do research. Like, I know when I'm teaching a class, I do very little research myself. So it's just the same for you guys. You know, the whole education thing is actually a really interesting field. At Michigan, and perhaps in the other schools as well, there's this effort now to have engineering education research embedded in the research of students, right? So that's kind of an emerging thing. So say somebody is doing research in a topic, right? Say, you know, artificial intelligence, they might have some component of that where they talk about how to teach that, right? So we have some faculty now who are just dedicated towards that kind of thing as well. So
I think another aspect I wanted to add there is I think it's a really good idea to let your advisor know what your preferences are. It's always a good idea for him or her to know that. But at the same time, keep in mind that you'll gain a lot if you're flexible and you adapt to the different circumstances. One of the things that, you know, for example, we could add to what we presented here is that those positions are incredibly competitive. You know, you could be applying to a school that might have, you know, a couple of thousand applications and only maybe 50 or 100 of these type of positions available. So you're competing with a huge number of very talented people. And so when you do receive any of those offers, even it might be, oh gosh, it wasn't exactly what I wanted, you should feel extremely proud because those are very competitive offers.
So for us as professors, you know, we have to get funding to pay for students, right? It has to pay all those, the tuition, the stipend, the benefits as well. And we get taxed by the university as well. So every dollar we pay towards a student, we have to pay 50 or 54% tax, right? And then if you're doing experimental work, like my students design chips, right? So we have to pay for a chip fab and we have to pay for equipment. So for every grad student I have to get at least 100K per year, right? So those PhDs are 5 or 6 years. So that's 500 or 600K of an investment, right? So now you guys don't have to pay that, but we have to worry about it. So that's
somebody does. And believe me, the type of effort that goes in getting those type of grants and this type of continued support is immense. So it's a good idea for a student to appreciate the opportunity they're given because it's a very expensive one. It's an extremely expensive model. It leads to fantastic results, but it's an expensive business model.
Would you be able to work with your faculty member on that? Because I know that I'm working in a research lab and my professor, he teaches a course, and so he has some people in his lab TAing.
Oh yeah. So you mean like TA with your advisor? Yeah. So yeah. Often I have a student from my own group help work by TAing, and then they're funded as a TA for it. That happens occasionally.
It also depends a lot on the university. Some universities assign TA-SIPs based on Model A and some others based on Model B. So it depends very strongly on the university as well.
You know, if you let your advisor know about that too, sometimes he or she could say, maybe we'll schedule a time where you'll come in for 2 weeks. You'll be the instructor for the class. And I'll sit in there and give you some feedback on how it goes. That happens too.
Right. So, how does one switch majors from what they're studying in undergrad to what they're studying as a master's student or PhD student? Because I've read about people who've studied mechanical engineering as an undergrad and they've taken up a master's in EE, or EUs who went on to finance or economics, and I even read about someone who studied English and then moved on to physics. Could you shed some light on how that's possible if you've encountered something similar?
Yeah. So I have actually a personal experience, a person I know really well, which I'm not going to reveal here. She started by studying economics. Middle of her career as an undergraduate, she got a double major in mathematics, and now she's doing a PhD in electrical engineering. Yeah. So how do you switch? The idea is to always make persistent but small steps and make sure that you're basically doing the right thing for you. So you could try taking a class or two from maybe the major that you want to switch to. Make sure, first of all, you enjoy that. Second, that you do well. And third, that there are actually opportunities over there. And slowly but surely you can do that.
So electrical engineering is extremely broad. Like in our department, we go all the way from data science to devices, right, with everything in the middle. And it turns out that a lot of our students actually come from different disciplines. Like we do have a share of mathematicians applying for like the data science kind of jobs. We do have mechanical engineers who end up, building MEMS devices. And then we have traditional electrical engineers as well. It's a very broad discipline, and it covers a lot of ground. So it's kind of natural to have some students coming in from different disciplines. For a master's, in some ways, it's a little bit more constrained, I think, because for a master's, like the way we do it at the University of Michigan, when you apply for a master's, there's like 10 different subfields that you apply to. And then you have to do a certain number of courses, actually only maybe 3 or 4 in that subfield. And then you can do stuff in other areas as well. So you do need to kind of do some focus, but there is the opportunity to look at other things as well. And actually we force people to take cognates just to kind of expand a bit. So, yeah. Tim?
Do you want to add?
Yeah. So I have a degree from Illinois in electrical engineering and a master's degree in mechanical engineering. Technically, when you switch degrees like that, you get a master's degree in engineering, and the mechanical part disappeared. But I did my master's here at Purdue in mechanical engineering. And it really just comes down to just the nature of the work. And so I had a lot of computer background, an electrical engineer at Illinois. When I came here, I was doing a lot of data modeling and computational work like that. So that has a little bit to do with the research that you'd be undertaking. If there's a good fit, I think it's easy to hop.
It's certainly not uncommon. We have, exactly as you heard, several people who do that. And the breadth of the field kind of supports that. I would say even in some cases it is an advantage to come from a different background, particularly if you're applying to a group who is interdisciplinary. So I would not make this a hurdle,
So just to follow up, sometimes when you're applying to schools for a slightly different program, do they also expect or prefer if you've had experience working in that?
They might have some proficiency requirements.
Okay.
That can be, for example, I will pass that particular topic area on the qualifying exam. And if you didn't, then maybe that identifies an area that you should take a few additional classes in just to help brush up on that or to solidify that. If you've taken, let's say your background is mechanical engineering, but I've taken a few electrical engineering courses, that can demonstrate proficiency in that particular area. Or maybe I'll take that course, I'll sit in on the course, or I'll take the final exam in a particular course and pass that. And again, that could show proficiency. So some programs require that as well.
So I think it kind of depends a lot on whether you're doing a master's or a PhD. Usually when PhD students are admitted to most programs, the potential advisors actually look at the files, right? So they will look at files and say, well, she has this background in math, but her kind of undergrad research and her coursework really matches what I'm doing in my group, and that could be a great help, right? So those applications are actually looked at very thoroughly. So if you get admitted, the chances are you're well suited to the program. For masters, then it's a little bit different. Like, just to put some numbers on things, we get 1,500 applicants to our master's program, and somebody reads all of those. Usually there's some pre-screen that's done based on, GPA and undergrad school and so on. And then we do look at the coursework to make sure that people can, match up, right? But it's, definitely with the PhD, if you get an offer, you probably are really suited to the program then.
Often your committee will also help in deciding what kinds of courses you need. Your advisor is going to say, look, you've got a background someplace else. This would really help if you take this course. That might not count towards your program, but you already have the foundation now with your undergraduate. Now you're looking towards, what am I going to do after my PhD? Will this help? Is this going to get me where I need to be? Now apply your imagination and your background and use that in the research, and also seek out that which you need for your next step.
Either way.
Okay. I guess my question is more on the realm of whether or not if I should go get a master's degree or go straight to PhD, where we specialize in Google. So I've talked to a lot of master's students that tell me that if I want to focus in industry, I should avoid even thinking about PhD, because for most positions, it would just make you overqualified for a certain position within a company. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
I hear that too from people in the industry, and it's usually like the thing is, like, the people recruiting for jobs for industry, they have a real conflict of interest because they want to get you as an undergrad because that's what their recs are for, right? So, and I'm kind of annoyed at some companies, they come to campus and they say, well, don't do a master's or PhD, just come to us because we have these openings. And for some people, that's a really good match, but really having a PhD or having a master's is a huge advantage. And if you look at the really successful people in companies like at VP level, like companies like Qualcomm and Intel, most of those people have PhDs, right? And the sort of opportunities that you'll get in industry after having a master's or a PhD are a lot different to what you'll have just with a bachelor's, right? Like when you a lot of people, when they enter big companies like TI, for example, they might be doing some sort of tech support or marketing job if they have a bachelor's degree. But if they have a master's degree, they'll get into some sort of design job, right? If they have a PhD degree, they'll have a higher level design job and probably a better chance of rising up through the company. Also, if you're thinking of doing a startup company, having a PhD is huge there, right? For two reasons. One, the process of doing the PhD will make you aware of like research opportunities of new ideas. You'll generate new ideas. You'll know how to make those work. But you'll also have a lot more credibility with VCs, right? You'll be looking to get your company running. You'll need like $10 or $20 million to get it off the ground. If you have a PhD from a top university, that's going to make a huge difference, right? So, I don't know. So,
So, I covered a lot of things I wanted to say, and I'm going to try to contain my response to not be too strong to the people who give this type of advice. But I will say that there is zero reason to avoid getting a PhD, absolutely zero, if the only concern is overqualification. There is no such a problem. In fact, I will say, and we have common discussions with industry about this, there are industry in the microelectronics field right now, nanoelectronics field, that simply have stopped hiring masters. Period. I don't want to mention names right here. And the reason is that you need to think the fact that complexity keeps increasing over time, and simply they can't do that. Now, it doesn't mean that the industry has stopped hiring masters. I'm just saying some industry has. Second thing about getting a PhD is that your career options are huge compared to having, let's say, a bachelor's, and better than having a master's. Master's, you have good career options, but PhD is by far the best. You can change industry a much easier way. You can do your own startup. You can go to academia. And in very, very few cases, just to leave some opportunities for that, you will be stopped just because you're already qualified. But I think Mike also hit on something very important, and that has to do with conflict of interest. We have a lot of very, very honest people who come to recruit on campus from industry, and this is fantastic. But occasionally you will also get somebody who needs to fill a position right now, and so they will try to get you to join right at that point.
So I had a follow-up question for that. I guess for a lack of better words, is it like weird to work in industry and then go to grad school?
No, it's not. Yeah.
Like going from like working.
No. So, I worked a little bit. The one thing you have to worry about is that you're going to take a big hit on your available income, right? So you might be going from an industry job where you're getting like 70 or 80K a year or more, and then you're going back to 30K a year. So your lifestyle is going to change. So that's one of the big factors, especially as you go on in your life and maybe, you're married or have a family or something, then it gets even harder, right? The other thing, which is a concern too, is that you can get a bit rusty, right? And it's probably not anything that you wouldn't be able to get over, but it just makes it kind of, the thought of going back to college and taking courses on math again and knowing, I've forgotten all my math. So, if I had to take courses myself, it would be terrible. But there's that feeling that, how would I start again? So from a personal point of view, the kind of barriers get higher, right? But it's not essentially harder, but it just seems to be harder, right?
So would you recommend, like, if you want to go to grad school, to do it right after undergrad?
I think so. Yeah. Now, I don't know. You probably exhausted after 4 years of undergrad, right? I think it's easier.
Yeah. I know it doesn't look like that, but it's actually easier. It's actually much easier. There is an age beyond which you cannot be a student again. And I think all of us have crossed that point. Now, there are non-traditional students. In my group, I have non-traditional students who have spent 10, 15, or even 20 years in industry, and not even relevant industry. So exceptions always exist, but the rule is that you run a risk of not accomplishing that. Yeah,
I have some of those. I actually kind of like getting non-traditional students in my group because it makes my life a lot more interesting. Mm-hmm. So one of just to digress a little bit, but kind of makes a point as well. One of my best students is a former Navy NCO, right? He spent 7 years in the Navy, not as an officer, and he came out of the Navy and he went to community college in Grand Rapids, which is about 100 miles from Ann Arbor, and he was pretty good. He was at the GI Bill, and he was doing great, so he transferred to University of Michigan. And in his junior year, he knocked on my door and said, "Professor Flynn, can I do some, research with you?" And I looked at him and said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And everything I asked him to do, he just did, right? Like often with students, you tell them something and they just completely forget. But Fred just remembered everything and did it and executed everything. So you can have people from different backgrounds, and in some ways it's a great thing. And having, a diversity of experience is great, right? So maybe I don't want to completely discourage you going off and doing something else, but it takes a lot of determination then to jump back into the system, right? That's the downside of it.
Yeah, you can imagine you might have, I want a car, and you get, you might get a car payment or maybe a mortgage, and now can I really do it? It can become difficult. Having said that, I did. So, but I knew, and we didn't live to the income. So.
Let's see, you have your hand and then we'll go here. Yeah, go ahead.
I changed my major from ME to EE last year, so probably I will take one more extra year to graduate. So would that hurt my opportunity to get in graduate school?
No, I don't think so.
No, you have a perfectly valid reason. So just make sure this is clear in your transcript and in your statement.
Yeah, you might want to explain in your letter like why you changed from mechanical engineering, and you could actually spend that in a very positive way. You can say now you have this experience in mechanical engineering and electrical engineering, and you're interested in the combination of the two as a system or something. You can make a really good story out of that, so it could be an advantage. Should be an advantage.
So, how much is the tuition for an international student to get a master's degree per year?
It depends so much on the school.
Yeah. Right.
What about Purdue?
Purdue is, I believe, a little over $20,000 per year.
Yeah.
If you pay for that. Now, again, it depends on the school.
Right. So, yeah, Michigan is more like $30K a year, and actually, there's no difference between out of state and international.
That's
right. So anyone outside of Michigan is international to us, right? So it's quite expensive. Yeah.
Similar. MSU.
Yeah, actually, one way that a lot of master's students help to pay their tuition is to do internships, right? So you do an internship in, say, the summer, and, you get we as institutions do a lot to help students get internships, right? There's career fairs and all those things. And that way you can sort of, cover some chunk of the fellowship, or not the fellowship, but the tuition expenses.
And some of those career fairs are truly targeted towards graduate students. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So while applying to a certain university, is it okay to also apply to different departments which might not be really correlated to like electrical engineering and economics?
Yeah, we've seen that happening,
okay.
And I think it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, each school actually has its own application typically. Yeah. So it doesn't hurt your chances to apply in one school and also apply to a different school. I would not apply to 12 different schools from the same university, but certainly it wouldn't hurt you to apply to a couple or two or three that you might be interested in.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. And
you may get offers from both too, yeah. So you have to think. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So actually, about the application, the most important thing is probably the letters of recommendation, right? That your GPA is pretty important. GRE is not important, right? It just has to be you just have to show that you can do simple math and write and stuff like that. If you're an international student, the TOEFL, there's a threshold for that, right? But as these guys were saying, the letters of recommendation are really important, right? And then the GPA, right? And then, like a lot of people fuss over the statements, right? Research statement is, fairly important, right? And personal statement is fairly important, but don't fuss over the GRE. Just get it out of the way and send it in.
But I do want to add something to that, and that is the fact that there is no such a thing as a machine that you take your application, you fit it in, and at the end you get a decision. It's people who review those. And even though I agree with Mike, there are others who don't. And so, for example, if your GRE score is substantially below average,
right? Well,
then it could hurt you. So I would say take it seriously. It just don't worry about the very last score there. But if you really, really do badly at that, it will hurt you.
Well, as an institution, the University of Michigan is downplaying the significance of the GRE. It's kind of our official policy, right?
But it does vary depending on
so maybe for outer schools it might be more important. Yeah.
I guess for each prospective university, is there generally a preference towards accepting graduate students and undergrad students from their own university?
No. It's actually, we actually encourage a lot of our students to go other places, and we'd like them to stay at Michigan, but we also want them to broaden their experience as well, right? So I suppose one advantage that students from your own institution have is that, well, you know who's writing the letter, and you know the courses and stuff. So that makes it a little bit easier.
How many are involved in undergraduate research? And how about for student organizations? Yeah. So you have excellent opportunities for letters of recommendation there, and advisors of the student organizations. That involvement is very good to get some of those recommendations. But make sure that you're involved to an extent that they know who you are, and you're getting to know them.
Another angle I would like to add to that question of internal versus external, let's say, applicant, is that there are advantages to both, in my opinion. Both staying in your own university as well as leaving. It's such a case-by-case scenario that's very difficult to give a particular response. So let me give you, for example, a story. If you are already, let's say, involved in a research group and you have made substantial progress working there, let's say, for a year, you may be able to join that group for a PhD and finish in 3 years. Right? That's huge compared to going to another institution. On the other hand, you may apply to a different university and get such a great offer from another university that you might say, well, I can do another year or two. Right? So it's very hard to tell. And that's why, from a university's point of view, we really look at the application, by itself without saying, okay, is it our own student or not?
I would recommend looking towards the group that you want to work with.
Mm-hmm.
What is the topic, and really making connections to those groups. Not so much university-wide, but the individual groups that you would want to work with. That's very important.
Yeah, and make sure there's a personality fit as well, right? That's super important. And, one good resource is to actually contact students in the professor's group, right? And actually, if you talk to a professor, usually and you say, well, can I talk to students in their group? Usually they'll say, yeah, sure, and they'll put you in touch. And if they refuse to do that, that's kind of a bad sign, right? And when you talk to the students in the group, usually they're very honest about things. They're surprisingly honest, right? A lot of you will get an opportunity to go and visit these as well, so that's a good thing to do, right? And I really reiterate what Tim is saying, about the group and the professor. That fit is really important, because you'll be with that person for 5 or 6 years. That's the average length of a marriage in the U.S., right? So, you want to have a good relationship there, right? So, and different people have different kind of things they like, So, just do your research on that. That's the most important thing.
To also reiterate what Mike said, take advantage of the days that universities open their doors for you. For example, we have an open house here. I will say exactly the same thing when I go to Michigan State, to the students there. You guys are local. Come to the open house, register. I mean, it's a huge opportunity to come and see what's actually going on. And same thing if you get invited to any of the other schools, go and connect. Regardless of whether you end up going, those connections are very important.
They might send you to lunch with the graduate students too. So
that's right.
It's a great time to chat with them.
Just to clarify, when you talk about joining a professor's group, does that apply just for PhD students, or do master's students for thesis?
Yeah,
for both. Yeah.
Both.
Well, when it's a thesis, then you need some research topic to work on. So that's generally defined by.
Right, exactly. So there's 2 types of masters. There's like a coursework master's and there's a research master's. And like the coursework master's is all coursework. Usually there's, like in Michigan for those, there's an opportunity to do some directed study, which is like you maybe get 4 credit hours out of the 30 you need. The research master's then is kind of a different animal. It's about maybe 2/3 coursework and 1/3 research, right? And then you'll be working with a professor.
And then I had a question about reaching out to faculty members. Could you speak a little bit more about what the content of that email would be? Is it asking, like saying, I'm interested in joining your group, or is it just, I'm interested in your research, or what's kind of the way to go about that?
It might be something like, dear Professor so-and-so, I'm highly interested in joining your group. I've read through the last few papers that you've had published, and I see you're working in the following areas, and this is something that I'm highly interested in. I've sent in my application. If there's a chance to meet and talk or to communicate further, that'd be most welcoming. I'd be open to that.
The other thing I would add to that is be persistent. If you don't get a response, don't be afraid to email again and again. Eventually, they may feel bad enough that they might actually respond.
Now look what you've done.
On the other hand, professors can, we need to realize we're getting 2 or 3 of those type of emails per day. And when we don't respond, don't take it necessarily as insulting. It simply means that it's just an efficient way of saying, look elsewhere. So that might be something. But don't be afraid to actually contact somebody several times if you truly want them. The other thing I would say is that if somebody doesn't respond to email, call them. If you have a chance to visit them, do it. And, be creative in this approach. Also talk to their students. Yeah. The students are more likely to respond. I've had cases where somebody said, hey, this person contacted me. I may be willing to look at this application again and see if there is any potential there.
Usually does some, most universities have grad coordinator staff, and you'll find those on the webpage. Like we have 3 coordinators, and those are another good resource as well. Like when you're filling out your application, you might have some questions. So, you can, in our university, you can call Kristen or Jose and you can say, hey, I'm really confused about this part, or, what can I do about, indicating which professors I'm interested in, right? So you can talk to those people as well. So that's another resource. And generally, if you want to make a road trip, like up to a university, people will be happy to talk to you, right? So, and maybe going through the grad staff is a good way of just kind of making sure that there's people to talk to.
You had a question.
I'm sorry that you're talking about, but
no, it's not that.
So let's say in our senior years we have a little extra time. So does it help to add on to our application if we take like a grad course before we graduate?
Oh, definitely. Anything that shows a strong interest and commitment to graduate school is viewed very positively. So absolutely.
And so in the application, how do you let the communities know that, you took this course and...
Yeah, well, they will see your transcripts, so that's one thing, right? And we actually do read the transcripts, believe it or not. And you can also mention in your research statement, you can say, well, I did this graduate level course in AI or something, and I really liked it. And that made me really more interested in, you can kind of fit it in that way somehow. Yeah.
Do you view applications from people who are in the industry, do you look at just their undergraduate coursework, or would you also look at what they've done while they're working?
Everything. It's most universities these days will do a holistic review, and so they will look at. Now, it also depends very strongly how many years are we talking about. So, have you been in industry just for a year, and then maybe your undergraduate GPA is still quite important. But if you've been in industry for 15 years, maybe what you did that it's not as important anymore. Yeah, I think you definitely have earned some rights for food. So we're going to take a break, but we'll still be available. And maybe we can chat one-to-one during this time so we can mingle and get to know you a little bit more. So the food's going to be outside. So, but I also want to, all of us to give a round of applause to the people who really drove many, many miles to come.